Hey there, Amanda from The Happy Homestead. I am really excited about today's video for you. This is going to be a 4-part series on home canning for food preservation. 8 years ago is when I really started successfully getting into water bath canning. And then last year, I really got into pressure canning and found good success with that. So I know that there are concerns. I know it can be scary. And I really want to help ease your mind, right? Get rid of those hesitations and those worries and answer any questions you have so that you can feel comfortable to do this at home. I started my canning journey. I started and then stopped. I started it probably 10 to 12 years ago, a long time ago. And I bought everything. This was for water bath canning. And I think I was doing some sort of jelly. And I bought everything. I did it. And my lids did not seal. And I don't know what I did wrong. It was so long ago, but I did something wrong. And the lids didn't seal. And I was so scared because I didn't want to poison myself or any of my friends and family. I didn't know what I was doing. So I literally sold off everything I had purchased, all my canning equipment, the jars, etc., and said, I'm done. I gave up. And then probably a few years later, maybe 5 or 6 years later, I started again. And I found success. And the reason is because I really tried to delve a little bit more into the process and the steps. And so I want to save you some time with that research. And I really do want to help you feel more confident. So today's video is all about the introduction. What are the different types of canning that there is, right? There's water bath and pressure canning. And we're going to go through what foods you would do with each, and really the process. We're also going to talk today about the equipment you would need, and then resources and books and where you can go get more information. So let's begin. Okay, so let's start with what is it? What is canning? Well, on a very rudimentary, simplistic level, right? You're putting food in jars, just like this one. You're putting a lid on it and a ring, and you're putting it in hot water or hot pressure and sealing it. So the mechanics is that when you put your food in and then you go through the steps for either water bath or pressure canning, right, you're heating it to a really high temperature to kill any bacteria. But also then once it starts cooling, the heat escapes and it takes the air with it. And so then what's happening, right, is if this is a canning lid, and pretend this is really magnified, right? The lid is still sitting on top of the jar, but there's still space. There is a space for air to get out, right? So then the heat and the air leave, and the vacuum sucks that down, and it seals it. And you'll hear a little ping or a pop sometimes, which is so gratifying. And then once it's cooled, then you can go ahead and store it. So that's really what you're doing, right? You're heating it up. So two things, you're heating it up in here to kill any bacteria. And then the heat, once the heating process is done, right? The heat and the air leave, creates that vacuum seal. So that's basically what it is. So let's talk a little bit about water bath canning versus pressure canning. So water bath canning is going to heat up to 210 degrees. So in your jar, everything is getting heated to 210. And now these are going to be for different types of foods, and I'll go into that in a minute. Whereas pressure canning is heating it up to 240 degrees, so a lot higher, and again, for different types of foods. Okay, so why do the canning? Why go to this trouble when food is so readily available in our society today like never before, right? Even rare foods, you can get them at your fingertip pretty easily. Why do this? Well, canning is a long lost art. It began over 150 years ago, and then it really progressed from there within more science and research done about it to make it more safe today. But really when it started, it was because folks were trying to preserve their food for the winter months when food was more scarce. So that's really the principle behind it, is you're canning your food within the spring and summer and sometimes even fall months, right, to get you through the winter. So why do it today? Well, it's a really great way to preserve your own harvest from your backyard. Or maybe there's a great sale at the farmer's market or your local grocery store, and you can stock up on something that is at a really affordable price that may not be available in a couple of months, right, in that same price point. Also, it really extends the shelf life of foods. You can keep safely canned foods on your shelf, now this is according to Ball Canning, between 12 and 18 months, and that's what they tout on their jars in the boxes. So the goal is not to like stock up for Armageddon, right? And to have this huge stockpile that maybe will eventually get used, because think of all that hard work that could go to waste. So it's not about doomsday prepping. It's about just stocking up for the winter. And so that way during the winter, you're eating through those jars of food. You're actually utilizing them. And so they're all not lasting on your pantry shelves for that long, right? A year and a half max. And that way when the next season of gardens and produce and harvests come available, you start again with the next year's harvest. So that's why we do it. We do shelf life. You actually save freezer space, which is another really great thing. Now, there are some things where freezing works and canning doesn't, but there are things that actually will enhance nutritional value by canning. For example, tomatoes. Tomatoes, when they're heated through and they're in the jars, their lycopene content goes through the roof. So again, there are some things that really can benefit you through canning. Okay, there's one more thing I want to talk about before we actually get into the equipment and go through it, and that's botulism. That is what people hear about, right? When you think about canning and eating canned foods and the concern about botulism. That's basically what killed, I think, a lot of people 150 years ago when they were home canning some things and it may not have been done right. So it is real. I do not want to sugarcoat and say, nah, you don't have to worry about that. Of course, it's a real risk. But as long as you're following proper procedures, your risk goes down exponentially. There are still times where things could go wrong. And so really what's gonna happen is when you're opening a jar, if that lid is not sealed and when you open it, you don't hear that pop, right, of the vacuum, I'd probably dump the jar. But I haven't had that, and I have been canning for so many years. If there's ever a jar in my pantry that I feel, a little questionable about, dump it. It's not worth the risk. So you may have heard, my aunt's third cousin's best friend, oh gosh, they got sick, and so now we don't can because of that. There are those stories out there. Don't be fooled, they're there. But you can manage that risk by following the right procedures. So let's go through and start with really what the equipment you'll need is and how to reduce that risk. Okay, so let's go through the equipment here, right? The goal is to heat the food up, kill the bacteria. Let's start with water bath canning. So with water bath canning, it's essentially what it sounds like. You're putting the submerging the jars into the boiling water. I think I said 210 degrees previously. It's actually 212 degrees. So you're using this process with acidic based foods. So think of anything like jams and jellies, right? Because of the fruit and then the sugar, and then also pickles and relishes, anything with vinegar and salsas. There's all kinds of foods you can do with water bath canning. I recommend that with anyone starting out, they start with water bath canning. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it's a much less investment and less time intensive process. And you can really gain your confidence through that. And you don't actually need to buy a whole lot of equipment. So I have an electric water bath canner here. Ball makes this. I just bought this last year and I do love it. You do not need to invest in this right away. So really, if you have, I think granite ware, right, like the black pots with the white speckles, it's called granite ware, you can use something like that. You can actually use a rather large stock pot if you have that. You just want to put some sort of rack down on the bottom. So it could be like the rack that came with your Instapot. People can use that. Sometimes people put a towel down in it, right? You just don't want the jars to sit on the bottom of the hot pan. So like this one, there's a rack here, right? So you can sit it on your rack. But water bath canning, you'll have your jars submerged in the water. There has to be at least 2 to 3 inches of water above the level of the jars. So if this is my jar, right, I can't have the water like right here. It has to be 2 to 3 inches above to really make sure we're heating through. And again, and there's a processing time for every recipe. So it's not a once and done process as far as like everything's 10 minutes or everything's 15 minutes, right? It depends upon the recipe, what you're canning, and it actually also depends upon your altitude. So making sure that you're following the right recipe is the best thing to do. And I get all of my recipes from Ball themselves, Ball Canning. So this is one book. This is an older book. It's a tried and true book. A lot of recipes. I mean, we're talking over 400 pages of recipes. And then this is a newer book that I got last year that has some more advanced and unique recipes, a little bit different. Both are great. You can also go to the Ball website and get some recipes, and you can also go to your local extension to get recipes, your local county extension. I would just be wary, you're not gonna just go can your favorite recipe that you've been using for years on salsa, for instance. You have to use, and you really you really should use, if you want to make sure you're following the right processes and you're being safe, a thoroughly tested recipe. That's the purpose. You're using these recipes because they have been tested for efficacy with killing all of the bacteria. So you're heating the jars and the contents up to 212 degrees, killing the bacteria. Once your processing time is up, you are going to let the jars cool a little bit in the water, and then you'll actually lift them. So these are some of the tools that you'll need, and I'll go through these. But really, you'll have a jar lifter to kind of lift it out of the hot water. You'll set it down on the counter. I usually set it down on a towel on the counter, just because it will be dripping some water, and I really want to keep everything as safe as I possibly can. And you'll let your jars cool for really up to 12 to 24 hours on your counter. And that's because you want to make sure that all of the air is escaping and you're getting that vacuum seal. So this is a steam canner. This is a pretty new addition within the canning world, maybe in the last 10 years. I bought this a few years ago and I really like it. So I did all of my water bath canning in a really big pot, not this pot, but a really big pot like this for many years. It worked. It was a great way to start. I'll say that it wasn't the most efficient, like energy efficient. It took a long time to get that water to boiling. So I then bought the steam canner, which is an approved way of canning. Again, you have a rack in here, right, to sit on the bottom. Your jars go in, and you only fill the water up to the rack. So it doesn't take nearly as much water, right, as it would to fill a big pot. You get the water to boiling, put the lid on. Now on this lid, there is a gauge to show, I couldn't tell you exactly what it's gauging, but it may be like the pressure of the steam. And so when it gets into the green, you know you start your processing time. So this, I love this, because you can do it on any type of stove. It could be glass top or gas range, doesn't matter. It doesn't require a lot of water, and it doesn't require as much time to get that water to boiling, okay? This is the electric water bath kettle. So you actually plug this in to an outlet, and it heats the water up. Now again, you do have to make sure you have that 2 to 3 inch buffer over your jars. So this will require more water, but it's a little more energy efficient because it gets the water boiling a lot faster. So I actually only use these two methods now for water bath canning. Okay, so let's talk about the jars that you're gonna need. You need to use approved mason jars. Now, the most popular brands you're gonna find are Ball and Kerr, and it doesn't matter which you get. They're actually all owned by the same parent company, so they're all manufactured in the United States. They're all manufactured to the same standards, right, safety standards that you would need. So Ball and Kerr are going to be the ones that you'll see mostly, and I'd recommend. There's a couple of other brands that are also owned by that same parent company. I think it's Golden Harvest, Bernadine, and maybe one more. But Ball and Kerr are the ones that I try to buy and stock up on. And so you'll see, right, so this is a Kerr jar. You might not be able to see that label very well. K-E-R-R, some people say car, and then Ball. And so there's the Ball label. So there's going to be a couple of different sizes that you're going to want to be looking for. Quart is the bigger one. Now, anything that you're canning in larger sizes, batches, it's going to be quart jars. You're actually not really canning. There are exceptions, but to keep this simple, you're never canning anything in larger than a quart-sized jar. This is a pint, so this is basically half of this. This is 4 cups, this is 2 cups, right? So pint and quart. And then you're gonna have half pint, quarter pint, right? So this is 2 cups, this is 1 cup, this is, I think, half cup, right? So you'll see the different sizes there. Pint and quart, like I said, are the ones that I try to stock up on most of my jars. I will do half pints. Sometimes I'll do this for jams and jellies, but honestly, I'll just do my jams and jellies in pint. And that way I have less jars I have to store, right? I can get more into the pint jars and store less in the pantry than I can with these. But there are uses for some of these sizes as well. The other thing you want to know is there's different, they call them mouths on the jar. So here's 2 quart jars. This is a wide mouth, and that is called a standard mouth. So Kerr actually invented the wide mouth jars, and then Ball quickly replicated it right years ago until they were purchased by the same company. But again, there's good uses for either of these. So when you're doing, say, tomatoes, soups, stocks, right, you can do the narrow mouth. But maybe you're canning some pears, some whole pears within a light syrup, or peaches. You might want to use the wide mouth, right? So you can easily get them out. I love the wide mouth jars for almost everything I can. It just makes getting in and out of these that much easier. And then the standard and wide mouth are available on the quart and on the pint. So you'll see this is both pint. And right, so the narrow mouth has a little bit of a neck there, whereas this one, no neck, just straight down. So again, great uses for either. And the lids will be universal between the quart or the pint for the wide mouth, because those are the only sizes that come in. I think there's a quart or pint and a half or quart and a half. There's one jar that also uses wide mouth. But again, let's keep this simple. So the narrow mouth will go through the gamut, through the range, right? It will go through the quarter pint, the half pint, the pint, the quart. The wide mouth is typically only the pint and quart. So the lids are the same. So what I'm trying to say is you don't need a separate type of lid for a standard mouth quart versus a standard mouth pint, right? Standard mouth is same for standard mouth. So I want to show you the lids. These are the lids. And when you buy jars, you're going to buy them in a box like this. They come in a case, right? So this is already packaged up. This is regular mouth, standard mouth, pint jars. And you'll even see on the box, it says we'll store up to 18 months. So that's what Ball says. And so they come with the ring, they come with the lid, okay? And so here are your lids. I want to make sure you understand you cannot reuse the lids. Once these lids are used, you can then wash them and reuse them to store something dry within your cupboard, right? Beans, pasta, whatever the case may be, grains. But you cannot process them again through the canning process. The reason is because, I'm gonna try to show you guys this difference here. This is a lid that has not been processed. Very carefully, this is the rubber here, the orangish brownish part. It's very smooth. There are no indentations. This is a brand new lid that can be processed. This one might be hard to see. This is a lid that has been processed. And so let's let it focus here. If you can see, especially over here, right, you can see where the rim of the jar made the indentation in the lid. Now, I don't expect you to inspect the lids and know which is which, but you need to know why that's the way it is, right? Why you can't reuse them. And that's because the rubber has already been pushed down, it's been compressed, you can't be guaranteed a perfect seal if you use it again. Okay, that's important to note. Now, there are lids, or say just, yeah, lids out there. It's the jar, the lid, the ring. So I want to make sure I use the right nomenclature here. There are lids out there, I think they're called Tatler lids, that are claimed to be reusable. I have no experience with them, so I can't tell you if they're good or not. You can do your research. I personally prefer to not use those. I reuse them if I need to store dry goods, or I just put them in the recycle bin and recycle them. The reason I don't want to use the reusable ones is because I've heard, yeah, it's a percentage as far as success or failure, right? Whereas you're going to get a much higher success on a brand new lid. And I don't want to go to all that work and then not have it seal. And then either try to reprocess it again or just throw it in the freezer or the fridge. That's just, I don't have time for all that. So I just stick with the new lids. Okay, so let's set. We got our jar. So this is a 1/2 pint jar. We've got our lid. And we've got our ring. And that's it, right? And so again, we'll have standard mouth rings and wide mouth rings. So that's the component with the jar. Now, you can get jars just about anywhere, right? Just look around at your grocery store, your hardware store, even like Facebook Marketplace. People are always selling jars. Just make sure that if you're buying used jars, you are looking to make sure that they are in good shape and there are no cracks or divots, or actually not a divot, but a crack or a chip is the word I'm looking for, within the ring here. And that's because, again, if there is, you may not get a good seal. The air won't really create that vacuum seal. So I buy used jars all the time from people online. Friends and family might give me some. I just inspect them, make sure they're safe to use, and you'll have no problems. Okay, so now filling your jars. It may just seem like you're just spooning the contents in, right? And that would work. But really, a funnel is gonna be your best friend. I love these funnels. So this is this is a standard mouth funnel, stainless steel. And so you just put the funnel on and ladle your contents in. And then I have a wide mouth funnel. You could use a standard mouth funnel on the wide mouth too, and it would work. But I got the wide mouth stainless steel also. Again, they are a lifesaver. Now, the other thing I need to note is that when you're filling the jars, you're gonna follow the recipe, and it's gonna talk about headspace. Now, what is headspace? If you're filling your jar, and actually this jar even has a line for freezing, but you'll never fill your food all the way to the top. You have got to make sure that there is room for the air to escape. And so it might say, usually it's about 1 inch or 1/2 inch headspace. So you can actually get a tool, I don't have it, but you can get a tool that has little divots or notches here, and you can see like what the headspace is. I just guesstimate by eyeballing it, right? I say here down to here is probably 1 inch headspace, and then obviously half of that would be a 1/2 inch headspace. I do almost everything to 1/2 inch or inch depending upon the recipe. There was only one exception, and that was apple pie filling, where I had to really, really go down because it expanded like crazy, and I had to process that thing like 3 times. It was such a pain. But follow the recipe on headspace. You want to make sure that there's enough air here that then escapes to create that vacuum. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the tools you'll need. And these are really simple tools. We talked a little about the funnels, right? But also you can buy canning kits, like a tool kit on Amazon or your local grocery store also. And it's going to include a few things. It's going to include this, which is what you would use after you pour your contents in. You can kind of like just mix it around. Now the reason they do this, by the way, is because it's supposed to be non-reactive, right? Other than, you know, some other material you could use. So it's non-reactive with the food. You're really just getting the air bubbles out. If you have a big air pocket in the middle of your food, it may not heat and seal all the way through the way it should, killing that bacteria. So you just move it around a little bit, get those air bubbles out. The other end of this is a magnet. You can easily grab your lids. So sometimes you can have your lids in just some simmering water, because what you're doing is you're heating the rubber a bit, and so that when you put it on, we've got that nice seal ready to go. So the magnet comes in handy as well. And again, try not to get overwhelmed right now. I know I'm going through a lot. This is a 4-part video series where I'm going to go into a lot more detail through the steps as we go through some recipes. So just sit tight. Okay, the other thing that's going to come in your kit is a set of jar lifter. It's kind of like a set of tongs, but it's for your jar. And so what happens, and this is good for either wide mouth or standard mouth. Once your jar is done processing or you're putting your jar in, you're just going to reach down in and get it in and out. So my jar lifter has certainly had some better days. I probably need a new one because the rubber's getting worn away, but they work great, and you need something like that to get the jar out safely without burning your hands. The other thing that I never used as much as until last year with pressure canning, but now I use it all the time, no matter what kind of canning, is the ring tightener. So maybe I have my hot items in my jar, I've put my lid on, and I need to tighten this, but holding this, it's hot. So what I do is you can easily just put this on and quickly tighten it up, right? You need that tight. And it's also a great way to get the rings off after everything is processed and cooled. So these, again, they come in the canning kit, are also very useful. That's about it. I'm just double checking. But yeah, you'll get your air bubble remover with the magnet, you'll get your jar lifter, you'll get the ring tightener, or they call it the ring wrench, and then you'll get your funnels, or you can buy extra funnels. And then you have your jars, you've got your pot with some sort of rack on the bottom, and you're ready to start canning. Okay, I want to touch on this. This is a pressure canner. Now, you've heard of pressure cookers. It works by the same principle, right? But you're not actually cooking the food in here. You're heating the jars through in here. But this is it's actually a pressure cooker and canner. I could use it for both. I only use it for canning. If I want to pressure cook, I'll use my Instapot. Which brings me to something I need to make sure I state. You cannot safely can any foods. I don't care if it's the small jars or not. You cannot safely pressure can anything in your Instapot. I think there were some misconceptions about that when it first came out. I think most of those are put to rest, but I need to say that just to make sure you know you are only pressure cooking in your Instapot, never pressure canning. Okay, so this is a pressure cooker slash canner, but I use it just for canning. It's the All-American canner. It's the All-American 921. I got this last year in 2020. I love it. It was an investment, but it's something that should last me for the rest of my life and even into my children's lives. So I can get in here, and again, there's a rack, just like there should be in any other canning vessel to keep the jars off the hot bottom of the pan. So you can can up to 19 pints in your 921, All-American 921, which is amazing, right? Think of like green beans or corn. Or it's either, I think it's 6 quarts at a time. So we talked about the water bath canning, and that's the acidic foods, right? The jams, the jellies, the pickles, the relishes, salsas, applesauce, anything kind of fruit-based in that way. Canned fruit in a light syrup, that's all water bath canning. Pressure canning is for anything not acidic. So any kind of meats, poultry, fish, and vegetables that are not in vinegar. So maybe you're just doing green beans, right, in water. Corn, stock, any type of vegetable or chicken stock. Soups, you can do chicken soups or beef stew. All of that is done in the pressure canner. And the reason is because there's no acidity, right, or it's very little acidity. This gets it heated up to between 240 to 250 degrees. And again, it's being processed for a certain amount of time, depending upon the recipe, so that you know when it's done, it has been processed properly, and it's safe to use and eat. We'll go into this process in a lot more detail in a later video. Okay, so we've went through the introduction and the basics between water bath and pressure canning. We talked about the tools needed, the types of jars. I want to leave you with this video today with do's and don'ts. Pretty simple, but important. So number one, don't deviate from a recipe. I mentioned this before, but I can't stress it enough. You will be tempted. You'll be tempted to go can your famous maybe your grandma's famous, but your grandma's famous recipe. Don't do it, because it's not been tested in a laboratory to make sure that it's safe and it will kill all bacteria. And the reason is because some foods can be canned, some cannot. So it's very particular in that. So stick with the recipes with either in the Ball books, the cookbooks, or freshpreserving.com, which is the Ball website. Or there's also the National Center for Home Food Preservation. It's a website. They have tested recipes as well. Or maybe with your local county extension office. Number two, once your jars come out of the canner and they're sitting on the counter, don't touch them for 24 hours. Just leave it. Some people say 12. I say 24. Just be safe. By the way, you're going to want you and your family to see all of that hard work you did. Sometimes I leave my stuff on the counter for 2 days or so because I want everyone to know. Yeah, I did that. So leave it there for at least 24 hours to let it properly set and seal. Do not store any of your food with the rings on. I will go into this in more detail as well in later videos, but this is important. The reason is because, right, you've got your seal, you processed properly, the lid is on. Once everything is cool, you're taking that ring off and storing your jar of food. The reason is because if the ring is on and something happens to that seal in the lid, you won't know it because the ring is holding it down and keeping it tight. So when you take the ring off, it's going to appear that that lid is still sealed. You'll pop it off and you may not notice any difference with how it sounds. Never store with the rings on. Do not reuse lids, right? Just don't do it. You'll be tempted to do that too. Don't do it. It's not worth it. And don't use random glass jars. This is something that's also pretty important. Don't just go choose the spaghetti jar you used last night and finished up for dinner and can something in that. Make sure you're using approved jars, mason jars, right? Ball and Kerr are the largest brands you can find. So stick with those approved jars. Also, be organized and allow yourself time through the process. This can be a process. It can take a couple hours depending upon what you're doing and how much you're doing. Enjoy it. Take the time you need. Don't overwhelm yourself. Start small, start little, and work your way up and enjoy it. Because if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do it again. And lastly, have fun. I hope this has helped ease your mind a little bit, or at least educated you a little more before you tiptoe into the shallow end of canning. So join me for the next recipe or the next video where we're actually going to be canning a tomatillo salsa together. All right, thanks so much. Stay healthy, stay well. See you next time.